everyone, and welcome to today's panel, DeFi 2.0, Wall Street meets blockchain. Today you will hear from the largest players in DeFi discuss their roles in reimagining finance, as well as the challenges and the opportunities to make this vision a reality. You will also be thrilled to know that this panel is the last obstacle between you and lunch. So let's jump right in. We have assembled an impressive lineup of industry leaders who will be sharing their valuable insights with us today. David, would you like to do a quick introduction?
Hi, I'm David Schwartz. I'm the CTO at Ripple and one of the co-creators of the XRP ledger.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sergey, co-founder of Chainlink, the leading data oracle in the blockchain space. And we also create bridging solutions, identity solutions, compliance solutions to create more complex blockchain transactions.
I'm Mary Catherine Lader. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Uniswap Labs, which builds the most used DeFi applications and products and is the leading developer of the Uniswap protocol, the most used DeFi protocol.
I'm Konstantin Richter, the CEO and founder of Blockdaemon. We're the largest infrastructure provider for institutions in crypto. We run around 250,000 nodes, empower transaction staking and wallet development for institutions.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. Konstantin, let's start with you. Blockdaemon is a leader in on-chain infrastructure for transactions, staking, and wallets. Given your expertise, how do you see TradFi playing a role in enhancing this critical infrastructure?
Yeah, thank you. It's a good question. I think one thing we've learned, we've been aligned with financial institutions really since the beginning. One thing that's unique about us, we have JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and Citibank with major shareholder denomination on our cap table. And we've done that really for the same reason that you asked the question, which is really we wanted to learn about compliance and the requirements they've had in a company of our nature that engages in crypto, so we ultimately don't make mistakes that would disqualify us to be a vendor to them in the future. And so I think one thing we can learn from TradFi is that it's very hard to reverse engineer compliance. And so understanding compliance, understanding risk tolerance is something that we can, in the crypto industry, learn from the TradFi institutions. I think it's really important to understand that sometimes in the crypto side, we're a little bit like, hey, our tech is 10x better than what you have. We can be a little arrogant about that. But there's another component than technology to the infrastructure stack, and that's security and compliance. And I think here TradFi has a lot to add, and that's going to be really exciting. The other is really, real-world asset tokenization, where obviously institutions are really primed to come in and bring a lot of liquidity to the stack that we like, right? Like these assets need wallets. There's monetization mechanisms around it that will really help crypto to find a larger audience. So I think those are the main primers for it.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. David, you have seen the whole evolution of blockchain from early Bitcoin days and have been a co-creator of the XRP ledger. In your view, what do you see as the most significant difference between DeFi 1.0 and DeFi 2.0? And what do you think is needed for mainstream adoption?
Yeah, so thanks. Both myself and Ripple have been in this business for well more than 10 years now. We watched the very early stuff going, to what's happening now with institutional adoption. In the very beginning, it was very experimental, and it was almost like Las Vegas. It was gambling. It was very sexy, though. Like you attract a lot of people to fancy casinos, but it doesn't have a whole lot of real-world utility. It's not Financial System 2.0. Financial System 2.0, a lot of it is frankly boring. Like for most people, what they need is like a savings account is an extremely useful thing. It doesn't produce high yield. It isn't very volatile, but it's extremely useful and practical. And so we've watched that evolution to more useful, more practical, more enterprise-focused, more compliant. Compliance was a bad word in the early days. Like everything was just completely decentralized. But the problem is the value is in the real world. If we're going to build Wall Street 2.0, we can't just say forget about everything that we have. It's trillions of dollars worth of real-world value. And so what you're seeing today is you're seeing stable coins, which are, they're igniting DeFi ecosystems. They're very institutional products, but they're also, anybody can hold them and transact them. They're compliant, but they're also, free-flowing. You're starting to see DeFi applications that look more like TradFi. They're not about getting huge amounts of yield at very high risk, but they're about things that make a lot of sense to people, like treasuries. I think the obstacle for mass adoption, and we're within a few years of that cusp, is we need the institutional adoption first. The same thing happened with the internet. You have to build bridges to where the value is, to where the people are. There has to be usability. We have to solve all of those problems to be able to turn that corner to mass retail adoption. So I think the precursor to that is going to be mass enterprise adoption, and I think that's right where we are now. That's probably why everybody's here.
Yeah, absolutely. MC, the long-awaited Uniswap v4 upgrade is now live. I'm sure many in this room are undoubtedly very excited about that. However, liquidity remains a key issue in DeFi, especially for larger institutional players. How can DeFi projects improve liquidity while still maintaining decentralization? And is there an inevitable trade-off between the two, or can you have best of the both worlds?
Well, first, thank you, Katie and Ondo, for having us. I have to say, I spent 15 years in suits in Midtown at Goldman Sachs and BlackRock, and I'm so happy to now be at a crypto event where where most people wear suits. It's just a great sign of how far we've all come. There's not a trade-off. I think that's a misunderstanding that there's a trade-off between liquidity and decentralized protocols. For some time, the Uniswap protocol, which is decentralized, immutable on Ethereum, has had deeper liquidity and top trading pairs than centralized exchanges like Coinbase. So that's not the case. But what has held back adoption of DeFi for TradFi? A couple things. Absolutely compliance, as was just mentioned, but also blockchains weren't fast enough or cheap enough. They just weren't competitive with your alternatives and the systems that you need today and that users need today. And so the net effect of that means that there aren't assets that people want to buy to drive more adoption. And so I think what's happened in the last 3 years, definitely last 10 years, is that blockchains are now cheaper and faster, and DeFi is more customizable. So with Uniswap v4 allows you essentially to create your own market structure and create your own customized set of rules for a liquidity pool. So whereas with prior versions of the Uniswap protocol or other DeFi protocols, you have to accept a determined market structure, and that's the same for everybody. Now you can say, well, we need only these users to be able to access this trading pair, or we want to integrate with this kind of leverage, with these kinds of limits, just the stuff that you're used to having in traditional markets. So that customization, I think, will unlock so much more innovation, which is, again, open to anybody. Anyone can build on top of it. There are already hundreds of what we call hooks of different smart contracts on top of Uniswap v4 within 4 days that are all allowing different kinds of trading market structures and different kinds of assets. And the other thing I want to mention that I think is really exciting for bringing way more liquidity, lots more liquidity on chain, is Unichain. So we are launching an L2 on Ethereum next week. That will be, in a few months, it'll be as fast or faster than Solana. It will be cheaper than Base, and it will be decentralized. So stakers will validate transactions, which is in contrast to some other L2s. And that is really allowing the benefits of decentralization, allowing network participants to benefit, and also bringing that faster and cheaper benefits. So I'm extremely excited about 2025, because I think that some of those advances in DeFi, along with all the other infrastructure that my colleagues in the panel can share, means that we're going to see a lot more adoption, and that some of the trade-offs that felt like they existed will be busted through, and it'll become apparent that they were just a point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. The momentum is definitely here. Sergey, you work with some of the biggest names in TradFi. Most of them are in the audience today. How do you see the relationship evolving between the traditional institutions like banks, hedge funds, asset managers, and those of the DeFi world? Can collaboration happen, or is disruption inevitable?
So I think there are two things that are true that aren't fully clear yet. The first thing is that the TradFi community and the DeFi community are each other's biggest customers. And the simple reason for that is that the TradFi community has a lot of the capital that is yet to flow into the industry. And the flow of new capital, it was what defines the growth of our industry, right? Net inflow of capital is what defines the growth of the crypto blockchain industry. Where is the new capital going to come from? Okay, $3.5 trillion now. How much more retail speculative demand is there? Let's say we go to 7 or 10. Okay, great, we're at 7 or 10, like, hooray for us. Where's the rest, right? Guess where it is? It's where it's always been, with the asset managers and the sovereign wealth funds and the banks and so on, right? So TradFi is DeFi's biggest customer, right? That's like still somehow not clear. That's very clear to me, and I think that's what's going to be happening. To David's point, yeah, we have to make the bridge connections, we have to make compliant transactions possible, we have to interoperate, we have to make all that happen. That's one thing. Another thing is that the DeFi community is the kind of hotbed of permissionless innovation that's going to consistently push the limit on the risk-return equation, right? Like, what are the financial markets basically about? Here's a certain rate of return at a certain level of risk. Where do you see the fastest rate of innovation? Is it in regulated institutions where everyone has to get a sign-up from 3 people to borrow a paperclip? No, it's not in these places. It's in the places where people can just ship a piece of code globally and test, whether liquidity is interested in that risk-return proposition very quickly, right? So you have this hotbed of innovation that's going to continually innovate and make the highest, best risk-return, newest stuff. You have all this capital over here, and then you have also a growing retail market in the public chain space. I think that's what people are interested in now from the asset management industry, is how do you create a tokenized fund that captures the public chain space. I think that's just kind of the early stages. And as that industry grows, that's also going to happen. So they're each other's biggest customers. The second thing that's going to happen, I'm pretty sure about this as well, is that the real-world asset trend will reformat the public understanding of our industry from being about highly speculative things, meme coins, NFTs, cryptocurrencies not backed by anything real, into what real-world assets are. I personally think that the real-world asset total value locked will surpass the cryptocurrency industry value, right? If you add up all the money that's going to flow into stable coins, commodity coins, tokenized funds, and a number of other tokenized things, the universe of that value is, in my opinion, larger than the universe of speculative demand for meme coins and NFTs and cryptocurrencies. Now, meme coins, NFTs, and cryptocurrencies are great. I'm a big fan of those. I really am. And it's like a wonderful thing. But I think you had a point in the internet when it was about like email or something. What's the internet? The internet's this thing that's going to kill the US Postal Service. And that's not what the internet is, right? The internet is information technology, right? Which is all information, not just the US Postal Service's piece of information. So I think we're going to be, now with the new regulatory environment, relatively quickly in a world where DeFi, TradFi interoperate, and our industry goes from highly speculative stuff to very legitimate stuff. And so the average person goes from cryptocurrency is a scam to cryptocurrencies is the new format for financial products that I want to deal with. But that's my view of where we're going.
Anybody have anything to add to that? Or?
No, I agree. I think that so many more assets, and again, I think it comes down to the infrastructure now can support different kinds of assets and can support people like all the people in this room and the needs of your customers. And I think that ultimately makes all of our businesses a lot bigger, right? That the point of this technology is that you can reach global user bases, that you can create different kinds of markets and make them that much more efficient and transparent. There are, of course, like technical challenges, like we have to figure out interoperable and digitally native approaches to identity. We have to figure out ways that some different kinds of risk that are sort of institutions that have risk sort of parameters are important to them can make sure those are maintained in DeFi when they don't always totally know who's participating. But all those are solvable problems.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. As RWA tokenization growth accelerates, what use cases are you most excited about? And what key problems do you think builders should focus on that will drive real-world utility? David, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'm most interested in the use cases where there's high friction right now, where people are poorly served. For almost any technology, when you're trying to figure out where you can get the traction, you look for people who are poorly served by the existing technology because you don't have to be perfect to get their business. You just have to be better, exactly. And the worse it is, the less good you have to be better. And I think areas like real estate, like venture capital, private equity, things like that are just very poorly served. Another thing that works surprisingly is the opposite end. It's actually both ends work better than the middle. So on one end, people are very poorly served, there's very high friction. On the other end, where believe it or not, where people are very well served and there's very low friction, you can actually get traction because if you can save a very small amount of money, that's better. So for example, tokenized treasuries, you've heard a lot about tokenized treasuries. Those actually work pretty well right now. You might think, well, why would that be an area? And it's because of that. It's because if there's a $3 transaction cost and you can push that down to a fraction of a penny, that's actually a lot because the margins are so small. If I'm only making 2%, you're charging me a couple of basis points. If I can save you a couple of bucks, that actually does matter. So I think it's like the two ends. As far as like what people should focus on, if we're going to turn to the corner to mass adoption, user experience is going to be absolutely critical. The biggest problem with mass adoption is when the users have to understand the details of what they're doing. If you look at any technology that's gotten mass adoption, whether it's the internet, computers, cars, it's when people don't have to understand the details of the technology that it works the best. And so it's getting that user experience. Interoperability is a big part of that. If it's like my money's over here, but the thing I want to do is over here, and I really have to think about that, that's too much work.
It's not worth the energy and effort.
And that's probably why institutional adoption is going to happen before mass retail adoption, because institutional adoption, that the complexity is not as big of a blocker.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Konstantin, do you have anything to add to that about new use cases?
Yeah, I think if you look at what's kind of missing still also for institutional adoption, I think there's really two things. One is wallets, I think, are really, really important. And I think it's something that I'm always amazed as a builder in the space, how poor wallet infrastructure still is in the space, on the consumer side and on the institutional side. And so I think there's a lot of evolution there, and obviously we're very active in the space. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in that space. Wallets need to be secure for TradFis. They need to be air-gapped. They're really the risk around digital wallets has to be basically zero. And it's been, a lot of companies have struggled to move towards it. I think the other thing that we need to understand is that we also need insurance products for these DeFi rails that ultimately protect companies from smart contract risk, from hacks, and those type of issues when it comes to DeFi. I think what we've learned is that traditional financial institutions really have no risk tolerance in that area, right? And so if there's a shade of risk that something illegitimate could happen or that assets are actually completely at risk, they're not going to engage in the technology. And so the game that we like to play in crypto, the math, the coding and chances and statistics, 99.99% is acceptable. It's not acceptable for a TradFi, right? And so I think that's something we need to learn and understand.
MC, Sergey, anything to add to that, or?
Yeah. So in the tokenization use cases, I think the money market funds are experiencing an unexpected level of success because they diversify risk. If you are in crypto land, then you look at things like Terra and why they fail. It's because they have lots of exposure to crypto stuff, right? Highly speculative crypto stuff. So it turns out that diversification is like a basic common sense thing that still happens and is useful on blockchains. So if you have a bunch of crypto stuff, maybe you want some non-crypto stuff on a blockchain. What's the most non-crypto thing you can think of? US Treasuries, right? So here's a US Treasury on chain, and it gets adoption and diversifies as your risk and gives you, and also, well, depending on the one you have, gives you certain amounts of yield. The second thing I think is stuff you couldn't own before. So you couldn't own a private equity fund. You couldn't own a piece of real estate. You couldn't have fractional ownership of revenue from an art auction. You couldn't have, you couldn't experience ownership of something. Yeah. That second thing I think is gonna start going somewhere right about now, and that varies by geography because different geographies vary. Real estate versus commodities versus owning different things that they want to own but couldn't own, and there's pent-up demand for that ownership. And then the third category that I'm really excited about is getting me yield on things I can't get yield on, right? So let's say the very smart DeFi people in flip-flops are able to generate yield on the thing that the people in institutional suits couldn't, right? Like let's say I can get yield on gold, right? That's pretty interesting, isn't it? So I think the DeFi people that figure out how to create yield out of traditionally non-yield bearing assets are going to be super successful people. Like some of the most successful stuff will be that. for that, you kind of do need this composable ecosystem where you can start building stuff around the asset to try and do experiments to see like how can I make yield happen out of this traditionally non-yield bearing thing. But I think someone's going to figure that out. And like when you start getting yield on things that didn't give you yield, like imagine you get yield on your home equity. Imagine you get yield on gold. That's interesting. That's an actual financial innovation that would really benefit people and maybe even the markets, depending on how much short selling it results in. But that's a whole other question. But yeah, that's what I think.
Do you have something to say, MC?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I think one way that I like to think about what Sergey was just describing is that today's markets, if you think of things that can be traded, they're like kinetic energy in the context of the financial system. And there's so much potential energy that isn't converted into kinetic energy just because of the way that markets work and what can be deposited in a market or exchanged in a market. And so if we have much more flexible infrastructure and a tokenization allows you to then turn more of that potential energy and value, whether they're natural resources reserves or bringing on-chain yield in different forms to different users around the world who can't access it today, we should have just so much more equivalent of that kinetic energy and realized liquid value. So what does that mean? I think that TradFi, you should be identifying what you think the use cases are. What are your business problems? What do you need solved? And then be sharing that as like requirements and needs with the universe of open source and public developers, as well as private companies that have a specific focus. Because part of the benefit of the permissionless and public blockchain innovation that Sergey was talking about is that you could put out a blog post and just say, hi, we're a financial institution, here's some of the problems that we're trying to solve at a level that you're comfortable sharing publicly, and people will start to try to innovate to solve them. And that's a new approach to innovation. I think a major step forward for financial institutions in the past several years is accepting public blockchains and realizing that you can have your own compliance requirements and security standards met on the same foundation of public innovation. It doesn't mean that you have to opt into the exact same standards as all of the participants on those blockchains or protocols. So I would just invite you to say what problems you need to solve, what use cases you need, and I think you'll see a lot of people start to rush after them. In that context, I'm excited about all the things that we talked about: money market funds, payments, on-chain yield from new forms of it, from new assets that don't generate today. But I think if you look at even just the money market funds that are being launched today, they're being structured in different ways. They have different fund jurisdictions. They have different ways that they treat distributions and withdrawals and redemptions. And so you see that each of those examples, it may feel competitive, it may feel crowded, but I think the proliferation of those will help us come to a standard faster. And so we'll end up with something that gets you something, we'll end up with tokenized products that get faster towards something that's more like on-chain real-time yield, on-chain real-time pricing, which is the ultimate innovation, as opposed to just trying to serve a set of users who today are on-chain and you want them to buy your money market fund, but they're still gonna only be able to redeem in a multi-hour window, right? So the point I'm trying to make is like, don't overthink what is your specific use case, like just kind of put it out there, and I think we're gonna see a lot of convergence over the next couple of years on a few different standards.
Yeah, and these are all building blocks as well, right? Once you have that, you can build things on top of it, which makes it compostable and open. So leads me to my next question. In DeFi, we're seeing decentralized alternatives to capital markets. We have lending, borrowing, and derivatives. What changes do you expect in the future of traditional capital markets as DeFi continues to develop? Anyone want to jump in there?
There's so many.
I mean, they're going to be more accessible. They're going to be open 24/7. I mean, well, all the obvious stuff.
I'll give you two examples. One is I think that I'm really curious to see how the notion of a fund's jurisdiction changes over time. Like, what does a geographic boundary for a financial product mean when you can access users all over the world instantly? And so I think it's like mostly a regulatory question, but I think we'll have to see new products that are more portable globally, right? That's one. And then a second is, I also think we'll see changes in innovation in derivatives and futures contracts. We've already seen them, but if you think about just some of the operational risk around derivatives and how those can create trading opportunities, arbitrage opportunities, but also some negative risks, I think that we'll see improvement and advancement in derivatives markets that I hope is embraced in the US, because I think while some on-chain derivatives have a tremendous amount of risk in the form of leverage and not having leverage ratios, they also reduce a lot of operational risk in traditional derivatives.
Yeah, so, not understand your question, my fault. But basically, it's going to be very subdivided on the basis of identity. So there will be identity unknown markets, and that's what the majority of public chain DeFi, crypto, perp decks, who knows who is who, how many cats and dogs do you trade for my course, and who are you and who am I, and nobody knows anything, right? Like, there's a certain amount of anonymity that's valuable to the world in financial markets, and that's one subset of the market, right? That's where a lot of the market activity is now. Anonymous, no identity trading and activity and assets and stuff and ownership. And now I think we're entering a world where there's identity-laden assets and ownership. And I think the answer to your question is, what is the value and the amount of capital in each of those groups? What is the amount of capital that your system can access as a market if you go into the identity-laden, compliance, AML, KYC-based world versus the anonymous, frictionless, nobody knows who anyone is, and like they could all run away tomorrow world, right? I think probably the identity-laden world is much larger, and it's now starting to come in, which is why we've built a lot of identity solutions for putting identity on chain and making transactions identity-laden. That's generally what I think many of the people in this room also believe, is that there's much more of a market in the part of the world that is regulated and where there's AML KYC compliance versus the part of the world. But that's still that part of the world's really cool. That nobody knows who anyone is, what 3 cats for my dog coin world, which is great. But I think that's the early stages of our industry, and the later stages are the identity-laden traditional institutional capital flowing in, which is what we're building around and what I feel a lot of people here in this room are building around.
Unfortunately, that's time. David, Sergey, MC, Konstantin, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.